Hello, buddy. Welcome back to Tin Man Square Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'm reacting to my second Midnight Nightmare video for you guys. And this was titled Four Scary True Night Shift Horror Stories. So without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights off, boot the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road in the bag, shall we? Okay, here we go.
The work at the graveyard shift at a hospital was always challenging.
I bet.
I had grown accustomed to the late-night emergencies, the quiet halls, and the occasional eerie feeling that came with working in a place where life and death were a constant presence.
That is why I would not work in no hospital, because I'll get the heebie-jeebies a lot. Because you got to deal with patients that are just got minor injuries and they're still very much alive, and then you got the patients that are critical condition and might end up dying. And plus, when you're working at night, when there's no visitors or any other staff that are on the graveyard shift, it'll get kind of spooky and creepy. But anyway, let's continue with this person's story, see what happens next.
Little did I know, one night would test my nerves in ways I had never imagined. It was a typical Friday night, and the hospital was quieter than usual. Most of the patients were asleep, and the only sounds were the distant beeps of monitors and the occasional shuffle of a nurse's footsteps. I was stationed at the nurse's desk in the emergency department, catching up on some paperwork, when the call came in. ER, this is Jessica. How can I help you? I answered, my voice steady despite the late hour. We're bringing in a patient, the paramedic on the other end said. Middle-aged male, severe anxiety, possible psychosis. ETA 5 minutes. I nodded, jotting down the details. Understood. We'll be ready. A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived, and the paramedics wheeled in a man who looked terrified out of his mind. His eyes were wide, darting around the room, and he was muttering incoherently.
I would probably be creeped out at this point. He's either high on some sort of bad drugs or he just completely lost it. But let's just see.
His clothes were torn, and he had scratches all over his arms. What's his name? I asked the paramedic. No ID, the paramedic replied. He was found wandering on the side of the highway. We got him into a room, and I tried to calm him down as the doctor examined him. You're safe now, I said softly. We're here to help you. The man looked at me, his eyes full of fear. They're coming for me, he whispered, his voice trembling. You have to help me. Who's coming for you? I asked, trying to keep him talking. He did not answer, panic in his eyes. The doctor sedated him, and we admitted him for observation. As the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease his words had left me with. I returned to my paperwork, but my mind kept drifting back to the man in room 12.
Yeah, because I'll be thinking that, oh crap, is there some people looking for him? Like maybe he got into a bad situation with some thugs and they're probably going to try to track him down and delete him from this world, basically. Oh boy, at this point I'll be seeing if security can like stick around his room or keep an eye on if the emergency room door opens up and see if anybody's looking for him.
Around midnight, strange things started happening. I was walking down the hall to check on the patients when I noticed a shadow move across the wall. I stopped, my heart pounding, but when I looked around, there was no one there. I shook it off as my imagination and continued my rounds. But as I reached room 12, I saw that the door was ajar. The man had been sedated. There was no way he could have gotten up. I pushed the door open and peeked inside. The room was empty. I felt a chill run down my spine. I checked the bathroom, but it was also empty. Panic started to set in as I realized he could be anywhere in the hospital. I rushed back to the nurse's station and called security, my hands shaking. We have a missing patient, I said. my voice trembling. Room 12. He's a middle-aged male, severe anxiety, possible psychosis. We're on it, the security guard replied, and I heard the click of the radio as he called for backup. I tried to stay calm, but the fear was growing. I checked the security monitors, but there was no sign of him. The hospital felt unnaturally quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by an eerie silence. Then I heard it, a soft whispering, like someone was speaking just out of earshot. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. The whispering grew louder, and I realized it was coming from room 12. I walked back to the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was still ajar, and the whispering was clearer now, like a chorus of voices all speaking at once. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The man was back in his bed, his eyes wide open and staring at the ceiling. His lips were moving, but the words were unintelligible. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I approached him.
Holy Jolito. At this point, I'd be wondering how in the world did he get out of bed? And then when you go back to that room, he's back in the bed, but just staring up at the ceiling. Makes you wonder, is there any paranormal stuff happening around him? Hence why she's saying that he's talking in a weird way. Oh man, I'll be getting shivers down my spine at this moment.
Are you okay? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned his head slowly to look at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes, something dark and menacing. They're here, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. They're inside me. I backed away, my fear turning to panic. I ran back to the nurse's station and called the doctor, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The patient in room 12 is back, I said, my voice trembling. He's saying strange things. I think something's really wrong. The doctor arrived a few minutes later, and we both went to check on the man. He was lying still, his eyes closed, and the room was silent. The doctor examined him, then turned to me with a puzzled expression. He's stable, he said, but we need to keep a close eye on him.
No, I'll be like, Doctor, he literally was talking. Whatever's messing with him is making him awake and asleep. I mean, I'm kind of mind boggled at this. Very creepy.
As the night wore on, the sense of unease grew stronger. The whispering continued, and I started seeing shadows moving in the corners of my vision. I felt like I was being watched, and the hospital, usually a place of healing and safety, had become a place of fear and dread. Around 3 a.m., I was checking the monitors again when I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the screen, I saw the man from room 12 walking down the hall, his eyes fixed on the camera. But he was still in his bed. I had just checked on him. I blinked, and the image was gone. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was losing my mind. But then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around slowly, and there he was, standing at the end of the hall, staring at me with those dark, hollow eyes. I felt paralyzed with fear. He started walking towards me, his movements slow and deliberate. I backed away, my heart racing, and then I turned and ran. I ran to the security office, bursting through the door and gasping for breath. The security guard looked at me in alarm. What's wrong? He's out, I said, my voice shaking. The man from room 12. He's walking around. The guard grabbed his radio and called for backup. We both ran back to the hallway, but when we got there, it was empty. The man was gone. We searched the entire hospital, but there was no sign of him. The whispering continued, and I felt like I was being watched from every shadow. Finally, as dawn approached, we found him back in his bed, just as he had been before. The doctor examined him again, but there was nothing unusual. The man was stable, still sedated, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The rest of my shift passed in a haze of fear and confusion. I couldn't explain what had happened, and no one else seemed to have seen or heard anything unusual. But I knew what I had experienced, and it left a lasting mark on me, and I was unable to face another night in the hospital alone.
Makes you wonder whatever is possessing him is making him get up and walk away quickly, hide in a good spot, and then go back to sleep in the bed. I mean, that's the only thing I can come up with. I tell you what, I'll be telling the doctor, is there any way of waking him up just to get some clarity here on what's going on? Because I'm starting to get freaked out here. But I'll be telling the guard to talk to the cops to see if they can find any information on him, scaring everybody in here. But anyway, let's get to story number 2.
I used to work the night shift at a 24-hour hardware store, and it was usually quiet and uneventful.
Okay.
Most nights, it was just me and the hum of the fluorescent lights, the aisles empty and still. I used to find it peaceful, even a little boring. But one night, that sense of tranquility was shattered by a single, terrifying encounter. It was a Friday night, and I was halfway through my shift. The store was nearly empty, save for the occasional late-night shopper looking for last-minute supplies. I was stocking shelves in the plumbing aisle, my mind wandering, when I heard the jingle of the entrance bell. I glanced up and saw a man entering the store. He was short and gaunt, with a greasy baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Something about him seemed off, brushed it off as just another weary customer.
I wouldn't be brushing that off because if somebody walks in with their cap trying to cover their eyes, that will give me a sign that he's up to no good. Probably planning on stealing something from any of the aisles or rob you of the cash with the cash register. You never know. You got to be alert with people like this.
He walked slowly down the main aisle, his eyes scanning the shelves with an unsettling intensity. "Can I help you find something?" I called out, trying to be polite. He didn't respond, just continued walking, his movements deliberate and almost predatory. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but tried to focus on my work. A few minutes later, I noticed him standing at the end of the aisle, watching me. "Do you need any help?" I asked again, this time more firmly. He shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Just browsing," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded and turned back to the shelves, but I could feel his gaze on me, making my skin crawl.
I'll be like, that's nice that you're browsing, but don't want to be rude. You're kind of creeping me out staring at me. Or ask, is there a particular item that you're looking for? And see what he says. Or at that point, I'll be like, all right, done with this aisle. Move on to the next and see if he follows. If he does, that's a red flag.
I tried to ignore it and continued stocking, but my hands were shaking, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. The usual hum of the lights now a constant reminder of how alone I was. I decided to move to a different section, hoping the man would leave me alone. I walked over to the paint aisle, but after a few minutes, I saw him again, standing at the end, just watching. My unease grew with every passing minute. He didn't seem interested in shopping, only in following me. I thought about calling my manager, but I didn't want to overreact. Still, something about this man felt dangerous. The minutes stretched into an hour, and he continued to follow me, his presence like a dark shadow. Finally, I decided I had had enough. I walked over to the customer service desk and picked up the phone to call security. As I dialed, the man approached the desk, his eyes fixed on me. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice a menacing whisper. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just calling my manager." "Can I help you with something?" He leaned in closer, his breath hot and sour. "I told you, I'm just browsing. You don't need to call anyone." My heart raced, and I could feel the cold sweat on my forehead. "It's just a routine check," I said, trying to sound casual. Company policy. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes boring into mine, before finally backing away. I quickly called security, explaining the situation in a hushed tone. They assured me someone would be there shortly. As I waited, I kept a close eye on the man, who had now moved to the tool section. He picked up various items, examining them before setting them down, all the while glancing in my direction. The tension was palpable, and I felt a growing sense of dread. Finally, the security guard arrived, a burly man named Mike. He walked over to the man and spoke to him quietly, his demeanor firm but professional. The man seemed to argue for a moment before throwing his hands up in frustration and storming out of the store. Mike walked over to me, his expression serious. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, my knees feeling weak with relief. "Yeah, thanks." He was really creeping me out. "You're not the first to complain about him," Mike said. "We've had reports from other stores in the area. If you see him again, don't hesitate to call us."
Uh huh. I figured he was a troublemaker type. I already noticed it right away when he said that he went up to the cashier and said, "No, you don't need to call nobody." I'd be like, "Well, if you're just browsing, keep browsing. Quit looking at me, you know? It make me nervous."
I thanked him and tried to get back to my work, but the fear lingered. Every sound made me jump, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the man to return. A few nights later, I was closing up the store when I heard a noise outside. I peeked through the window and saw the same man standing across the street, just watching. My heart raced, and I quickly locked the doors, my hands trembling. I called Mike again, but by the time he arrived, the man was gone. The police were called, and I gave them a description, but there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. The sense of vulnerability and fear grew with each passing day. I started seeing the man everywhere, on my way to work, in the parking lot, even in my dreams. The constant fear was overwhelming, and I knew I couldn't keep living like this. One night, I decided to confront him. I waited outside the store after my shift, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Sure enough, he appeared, standing in the shadows across the street. I walked over to him, my hands clenched into fists. "Why are you following me?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He just smiled, a cold, chilling smile. "You interest me," he said simply. "Leave me alone," I said, trying to sound brave. "I'm not afraid of you." His smile widened, and he took a step closer. "You should be." I backed away, my fear turning into terror. I ran back to the store, locking myself inside and calling the police. This time, they took me seriously, and an officer stayed with me until Mike arrived. The police increased their patrols in the area, and the man eventually disappeared, but the fear never truly left me. I transferred to a day shift, unable to shake the sense of vulnerability that came with working nights. The sense of security I once felt was gone, replaced by a constant vigilance. I realized how important it is to trust your instincts and to never underestimate the potential danger that can come from even the most mundane situations. What I've learned from that experience, it's that you can never be too careful. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Always take steps to ensure your safety, and never assume that danger is far away just because you're in a familiar place.
You got that right. But man, once I confronted him, I would have been saying, "You better come clean about why he wanted to follow me." Because if he said, "You interest me," I'd be like, "Oh, that's it. He's going down." Because I'm getting tired of this bull crap with him. I would have been holding him down on the ground and wait for the cops to come to my direction and grab him. Then you won't have to worry about him anymore. He'll be behind bars. Which I hope, if the police patrolled the area long enough, they probably would have found him. But he probably slipped away to another area of that town, or he skipped town altogether. I'm just glad that he did not get hurt and changed over to the day shift, so he don't have to worry about him coming up back there at night to bother the heck out of him.
The night shift at a mid-range hotel had always been a quiet, almost monotonous job. Most nights, I would handle any guest requests and spend the rest of the time reading or watching TV in the lobby.
Now, I ain't gonna lie, that does sound like a nice thing to do at work. If I was working at a hotel like that, you handled the guest questions, complaints, and when you're on break, you could just look at the TV in the lobby. Talk about a relaxing time at work, right?
But one night, my routine was shattered by a series of terrifying events that still haunt me. It was a Thursday night, and the hotel was relatively empty. The lobby was dimly lit, casting long shadows on the walls, and the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. I was behind the front desk, reading a book, when the entrance door swung open. A man walked in, looking around nervously. He was in his late 40s, with a scruffy beard and an unsettling intensity in his eyes. He approached the desk, his movements quick and jittery. "Good evening," I greeted him with a forced smile. "How can I help you?" "I need a room," he replied, his voice low and raspy. "Something on the top floor, if possible." "Of course," I said, typing his information into the computer. "Do you have a reservation?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'm just passing through." I nodded and checked him in, assigning him a room on the top floor as requested. As I handed him the key, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him.
Yeah, that would be kind of weird. A man requests a room on the top floor, probably wants to use it, just spy on anybody that might come into the hotel. I don't know. But I'm already getting red flags at this moment.
His eyes darted around the lobby, and he seemed constantly on edge. "Enjoy your stay," I said, trying to sound cheerful. He muttered a thank you and hurried to the elevator, glancing back at me one last time before disappearing behind the closing doors. I sighed, trying to push the unease from my mind, and returned to my book. An hour later, I heard the phone ring. I picked it up, and a familiar voice greeted me. It was the man from room 503. "Hey, can I get some extra towels?" he asked, his voice shaky. "Sure thing. I'll bring them up to you," I replied, grabbing a few towels from the storage room. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, the dim lighting and quiet halls making me feel even more uneasy. I reached room 503 and knocked on the door. There was a pause, and then the door creaked open slightly, just enough for the man to peer out at me. "Here are your towels," I said, holding them out. He took them quickly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Thanks," he mumbled, and shut the door before I could respond. As I walked back to the elevator, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. I glanced back down the hallway and saw his shadow moving behind the curtains of his room. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to brush it off as paranoia. Back at the front desk, I resumed my reading, but my mind kept drifting back to the man in room 503. Something about him just didn't sit right with me. A few hours later, the phone rang again. It was the man in room 503, again. "Can you come up here?" he asked, his voice sounding more urgent. "There's something wrong with the TV." "Sure, I'll be right up," in a growing sense of dread.
Okay, at that point, I'll be like, okay, I helped him out with towels, and he said thanks, and now he's having a problem with the TV. He should have just said that before I left. But it's probably a ploy to lure you to his room, just so he could probably rob you, I guess. I don't know what's about to happen here, but that's kind of fishy to me.
I made my way back to the 5th floor, my heart pounding in my chest. I knocked on the door, and the man opened it, looking more agitated than before. "The TV's not working," he said, stepping aside to let me in. I hesitated for a moment before stepping into the room. The air inside was stuffy, and the lights were dim. The TV was indeed off, but as I approached it, I realized the power cord had been unplugged. Looks like the cord was just unplugged, I said, plugging it back in and turning the TV on. The man watched me silently, his eyes following my every move. Thanks, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded and quickly made my way back to the door, eager to leave the room.
Yeah, I would be too at this point because really, the cord was unplugged and that guy did not even think about looking down there to plug it back in, or he did it on purpose just for that hotel staff member to come up there. He is one creepy, mysterious dude.
As I stepped out, he grabbed my arm. Wait, he said, his grip tight. Can you stay for a while? I don't like being alone. I pulled my arm free, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry, but I have to get back to the front desk. If you need anything else, just call. I hurried back to the elevator, my heart racing. As the doors closed, I saw him standing in the doorway, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Back at the front desk, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept glancing at the security monitors, half expecting him to appear. The hours dragged on, and I kept checking the time, counting down the minutes until my shift was over. Just as I was starting to relax, the phone rang again. My stomach dropped as I saw it was from room 503. I can see you, the man's voice whispered, sending a shiver down my spine. I know you're alone. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. I looked around the empty lobby, the shadows seeming to grow darker and more menacing. I decided to call the police, my fear outweighing my hesitation. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. There's a man in room 503, I said, my voice trembling. He's been acting really strange, and now he's making threats. I think he's dangerous. The operator assured me that officers were on their way and told me to stay put. I hung up the phone and sat behind the desk, my eyes fixed on the security monitors. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of footsteps in the lobby. I looked up to see the man from room 503 standing there, a sinister smile on his face. You called the cops on me? He asked, his voice low and threatening. I backed away, my heart pounding. Leave me alone, I said, my voice shaking. He took a step closer, his eyes filled with madness. You shouldn't have done that, he hissed. Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air, and the man's expression changed from anger to fear. He turned and ran out of the hotel. The police arrived moments later, and I explained everything to them. They searched the area, but found no sign of the man. They assured me they would patrol the area and keep an eye out for him. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and anxiety. I couldn't shake the image of his sinister smile and the sound of his threatening words. I spent the remainder of my shift constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling a sense of dread that I couldn't escape. I requested to be transferred to the day shift, unable to face another night in the hotel alone. The experience left me shaken, and I realized how quickly a seemingly safe environment could turn into a nightmare.
Man, I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Seemed like that guy was really mentally insane that he wanted some company because he was lonely. I would have been like, look, you go out on the night in town, you might find somebody, but not this person. But yeah, that would be creepy just to see him threatening you in the lobby saying you shouldn't have called the cops, but then when they show up, he cowards out and runs away. Man, I hope they do find him and place him in jail or in a mental asylum because he don't need to be out in the streets if he's acting like that, harassing people.
Working the night shift at a small, secluded motel had always been uneventful. I enjoyed the quiet, the solitude, and the chance to catch up on reading between checking in the occasional late night traveler. But one night, everything changed, and my sense of safety was shattered. It was a chilly autumn evening, and the motel was almost empty. The leaves rustled outside, and the wind howled softly, adding to the eerie ambience. I sat behind the reception desk, sipping on a cup of hot coffee and flipping through a novel, when the sound of a car pulling into the lot caught my attention. I glanced up to see an old, beat-up sedan parked haphazardly near the entrance. A man stepped out, his movements jerky and unsteady. He looked disheveled, his clothes wrinkled and dirty, and his hair a tangled mess. I watched as he approached the door, feeling a twinge of unease. The door swung open, and the man stumbled inside. He paused for a moment, his eyes darting around the lobby before finally settling on me. There was something off about him, something that made my skin crawl. "Good evening," I greeted, forcing a smile. "How can I help you?" He approached the desk, his eyes wild and unfocused. "I need a room," he mumbled, his voice rough and raspy. "Somewhere far from everyone. I don't want to be disturbed." I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "Of course. We have a room available at the end of the hall. It's quite private." He fumbled with his wallet, eventually pulling out a crumpled $20 bill. I checked him in quickly, handing him the key and directing him to his room. As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong.
Yeah, that's very wrong if somebody asks for a room away from anybody. Makes you wonder if he's a criminal trying to hide out from law enforcement. But he's giving off a lot of sketchy vibes in this story.
The night went on, and I tried to return to my book, but my mind kept drifting back to the strange guest. The wind outside seemed to grow louder, howling through the cracks in the windows, adding to my growing sense of unease. Around midnight, I heard a strange noise coming from the guest's room. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, like someone was hitting the walls repeatedly. I frowned and got up from my chair, heading down the hall to investigate. I knocked on the door, hesitating for a moment before calling out, "Sir, is everything all right in there?" There was no response, just the continued thumping. I knocked again, louder this time. "Sir, is everything okay?" The noise stopped abruptly, and I heard shuffling inside. The door creaked open slightly, and the man peered out at me, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice laced with irritation. "I've received some noise complaints from other guests," I lied, trying to sound calm. "I just wanted to make sure everything was all right." He glared at me for a moment before nodding. "Everything's fine. Just leave me alone." The door slammed shut, and I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked back to the reception desk, my mind racing with thoughts of what might be happening in that room. The thumping resumed, and I decided to keep a close eye on the situation. An hour later, I received a call from one of the other guests. They were complaining about the noise coming from the same room. I assured them I was handling it and hung up, feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. I approached the room again, my nerves on edge. This time, the door was slightly ajar, and I could see into the room. What I saw made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in strange, disturbing drawings, figures, and symbols that made no sense, scrawled in what looked like blood. The furniture was overturned, and the room was in complete disarray. But the man was nowhere to be seen. I pushed the door open fully, stepping inside cautiously. The smell of sweat and something metallic filled the air.
Oh, I bet you he's hiding in there somewhere, but that would be a strange sight to see for sure. A bunch of drawings in blood on the wall. I mean, it'll be disturbing if he cut himself just to bleed out and make all that artwork. So that guy's clearly not in the right mind. Call the police just so you can show him all this.
My eyes scanned the room, and that's when I saw him. He was standing in the corner, facing the wall, muttering to himself. His hands were covered in blood, and he held a small, jagged piece of glass. He didn't seem to notice me as he continued to draw on the wall, his movements frantic and desperate. "Sir," I said, my voice shaking, "you need to stop this right now." He turned to face me, his eyes wide with madness. "They're coming for me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I have to finish before they get here." I backed away slowly, my heart racing. "Who's coming for you?" He didn't answer, just continued to mutter and draw, his actions becoming more erratic. I knew I had to get out of there and call the police. I ran back to the reception desk, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. "Please, I need help," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's a man in one of the rooms. He's dangerous." The operator assured me that officers were on their way and instructed me to stay safe and keep an eye on the man from a distance. I hung up and kept a watchful eye on the hallway, praying that the police would arrive soon. The minutes felt like hours as I waited, the tension in the air growing thicker with each passing second. I heard the man's muttering grow louder, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and I saw him sprint down the hallway, running toward the exit. I ducked behind the desk, my heart pounding in my ears. The door burst open, and he ran outside, disappearing into the night. Moments later, the police arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the darkness. I ran outside to meet them, explaining everything that had happened. The officers searched the area and eventually found the man hiding in the woods nearby. He was taken into custody, and I later learned that he had escaped from a mental health facility earlier that day. The ordeal left me shaken to my core. For weeks, I couldn't sleep properly, haunted by the memory of the man's wild eyes and the blood-soaked drawings. The motel felt different now, the sense of safety and solitude replaced by a lingering fear. I installed new security measures and made sure to never be alone during night shifts again. The experience taught me the importance of vigilance and being prepared for the unexpected. If there's one thing I've learned from that night, it's that you can never be too cautious. Trust your instincts, and if something feels off, don't ignore it. Always take the time to ensure your safety, and never assume that danger is far away just because you're in a quiet, secluded place.
Explains why he was acting sketchy, because he broke out of a mental asylum, stole a car, probably planning on getting away, but he had a nervous breakdown in the hotel room and he started acting weird. But I'm glad that the cops caught him and they're now going to take him back to where he was staying at to get treatment. I'll probably have nightmares about the whole ordeal myself if I went through that. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more midnight nightmare content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Court channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor. I said that's a wrap, and have a nice day, all.